Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode on our chat app. And in this episode, we are going to be implementing our UI. And yeah, in the last one, we were able to connect our socket service and see that it works. So for the UI, I've created a Figma representation. So this is what the sign-in looks like. And you have the option to sign up if you don't have an account. And also you can use social authentication. So for now, we've not implemented the backend for this. So we are going to do that at the end of the whole thing. So now if you log in, you would have access to the chat UI itself. So this is what it looks like. So the whole inspiration was derived from Darcy Shen. So Darcy Shen did something like this. All I had to do was just add few tweaks to meet up with what I want. And here is what the chat message itself looks like. Alright, so when we click on the setting here, we get to see the user profile, and from here we can update our profile. So that's literally what we'll be working on. And yeah, the episode will be of two. So there will be the fast version, which just shows a fast forward track of me implementing the UI. And there will be a slow version where I go through all the process of me implementing the UI. Alright, so that's all we'll be doing. Let's get on to it. Alright, so back in our code. So to actually start working with this, we want to install one more dependency. And this will allow us manage our routes. So I'm going to use yarn add. So the name of the dependency is React Router DOM. And this will help us manage our route. So for instance, we can have a route for login, we can have a route for register, and so on. So let's install it. Alright, so installation complete and the dependency as shown here. So the next thing we want to do is to go back to our source folder. So in here, we want to create a new file called router. So the router will serve as the file where all our routes will be defined. So to define this, we would import React as usual because it's going to be a React app. Then we need some imports from the React Router DOM we just installed as well. Alright, so we are going to need browser router from it, then switch, then route. So those are the imports we are going to need. Alright, so the next thing we want to do now is to define the components for our router. So here is our router component, and we are going to return the browser router as a component. And within that browser router, we want to also have the switch defined. Then within the switch, we can now start defining our routes. So the first route we are going to define will be the home routes. However, for now, we've not created any components to show this. So to do this, I will create a new folder. And within this folder, we are going to house all the components we want to have. So I'll call these pages. So we're going to have the login page, the home page, the register page, and the forgot password page. Okay, so let's create those. Alright, so here is the login.js, and we can just create a quick snippet for this. Alright, so this is what the login page looks like. So we have the login components. So it takes in props. So the information we are going to be getting within this props will be provided based on the fact that the route component is within the whole structure here. So because it's within the browser router, it's within a switch, then we have access to those browser the route information. So later on, we are going to explore the props to see the content we have access to. And basically, that's all we have to create. Let's just create the other components so that we can import them generally within the router.js file. Alright, so here are the remaining components. So the home component, the login component, and the register component. So I will ignore the forgot password component for now because we even don't have an implementation for that on the backend. So we just leave that for now. So now we can move on to the router to import all these components. Alright, so I've imported all the components here. So the login from pages/login, then register, and then home. So within the route here, we now want to define our components. So the first route will be the route for login component. So it's going to have a path of /login. Then the component is going to be the login component. Then finally, we want to specify a flag here. So the exact flag. So you can say it's equals to true, or you can just leave it as it is. So having it like this means you are specifying it to be true. So what this exact flag does is that this is a route, and by default, whenever it meets something that has login, then it kind of matches it with the components. So let's say, for instance, we have /login/ another thing, then it's still going to meet up because it contains login. But with the exact flag specified here, then that means this will only show login when the path is exactly /login. So that's literally it. So let's do that for the other components. Alright, so for the home, I just leave that as the single slash, and what that means is that this will be like the base route for our app. So in essence, what we are going to do is when we try to access this and you are not currently logged in, then we'll redirect you to the login page. So that's what the plan is. So after the whole thing is done, we can now export the router. Alright, so we really don't need to import the router to app.js because that's what we would see in most implementation. We can as well just import it directly to the index.js. So what we have currently within this app.js will serve as a reference when we start integrating the UI with the necessary functionality. So let's just come back to the index.js and import the router file here. Alright, so we can just replace the app. We really don't need that here. And that should be it. Okay, so let's run our service now and see that we have access to our components. Alright, so the whole thing has been served, and here is what we have. So here is the home, and if we try to navigate to the login page, then we get the login. So all that looks good. So the next thing we can now be working on is the font. So we need the font we've made use of here. Okay. So I'm going to be making use of Google Fonts to get the fonts. So back here, the font we used for the icon is the Polar One font, and the other fonts are Poppins. Okay. So we used just 2 fonts, and I think that's a good practice. Don't have too much fonts within your content. Okay. So Polar One, and here is what it looks like. So by the way, we'll be making use of SCSS as against normal CSS. So there's literally no big deal. It's not very different from each other. It's just that SCSS is quite better in the sense that you have more flexibility of handling things. So we'll be using that. And yeah, back to the fonts, we can select this font and we are going to embed it. So let's go and create our style. So I'll just create a giant SCSS file and just name it style.scss, and within that we are going to have all our style. So there's really no need to disintegrate things. I think the best idea is actually to integrate things, but that can come in handy when you are working with a big project. But for this, we have very less screen, so it won't really be a major deal. So SCSS. So to make use of SCSS directly in your React app, you need to install a package called Node.js. So let's try and put this in, and we'll just put it within the index.js so that it can affect everything. So import style.scss. And if we try to run now, if we check our server, we should get an error specifying that we should install Node.js. Okay. As you can see, you need to install Node.js. So let's install that. Let's close this. Alright, so the installation is complete, and now if we run our server, we shouldn't have any issue with Node SaaS. Alright, so we are back here, and now we can go on to embed this font. So we are going to use the imports, since we are going to be making use of it within the CSS file, SCSS actually. So let's go back to the style file. So we are going to import that, and after importing it, we are going to define the font variable. So those are the perks that comes with using SCSS. Not that you can't define a variable with CSS, but it's just so straightforward here. So the variable will be font family. Okay. So I'll just call it $primary font. So which is this. Then we are going to also get access to the Poppins font. So for the Poppins font, I'll just copy all the non-italic fonts because we don't have any italic font within our design. So just select all. So by the way, I can remove this one. Alright, so I will also copy the import for this and go and post in our style file. So here is what this looks like. Then we can define the second font. So $secondary font. Actually, the Poppins should be the primary font because that's what we are going to use more often. So I'm going to correct that eventually. Alright, so let's just switch. Alright, so the secondary font is the Polar one, while the primary font is the Poppins. So the next thing we can do now is we can define the style for the HTML and body. So body. And here we want to specify the margin to be 0, the padding to be 0 as well. And finally, we want to specify the font family to be the primary font. Alright, so if we go back to our page, we should see a noticeable difference, as we can see. Alright, so that's just the basic step. So that's the first part. So the next thing now is to create the structure for the login page. And by the way, if we go back to the design, so taking a look at the sign-in page, also known as the login page, as well as the sign-up page, so they have some similarities. So basically the input and the button, okay? So what we can do is we can computerize that, so we can make that structure a component, okay? Then we can just reuse which has to be used. So let's just create the structure within the login, and when we are going to move on to the sign up, we can just extract all that is needed. Alright, so back within our login file, so I defined 2 divs already. So one is going to serve as the entire container, which we are going to color, the color we want. And the inner is going to be the content itself, so where the contents will stay. So we also need colors, so let's just get the color. So we can also make it a variable. So we have primary color and secondary color as well. So let's do that. So the secondary color would be the orange or pinkish accents. So this one. Right. Now back to the login. We can just continue with our implementation. So we have the logo, the DevTalk logo. So let's do that as well. Alright, so I've defined the logo and gave it a class name of logo. So we can style this across all the possible logos we are going to have. And also I gave this title. So I'm believing this title might just be limited to the login container. And here is what it looked like. So if we save this and go back to the browser now, if we go to login, yeah, so this is what we have so far. So let's create the input fields. So we have two input fields, the username and the password. So I'll put those within a form. Alright, so yeah, I think by now we should be familiar with how to handle input fields. We've done something like that already. So let me just rush through this. So for the case of the password, since we are going to have an icon in it, so I would like to just put that within a separate div so that everything can be controlled. So I'll just put this within a different container. So we need the icon. So we can look for the icon, or we can just download it from here. So I think let's download it from here would be easier. Alright, so I've downloaded it. And now what I will do is I'll go back here and create a new folder for assets. So here is where we are going to have all our assets. And what I've just downloaded now will be pushed here. Alright, so here is the I. And I actually think I'll just get the second I icon, so the one for council, and download as well. So by the way, I'm making use of the Iconify plugin on Figma, so we can get all these icons from there. So we can just use this for the close. Alright, so let's download this one as well now. Alright, so the names looks complex, so let's just rename them. So I'll call this I close, and the other will be I open. Alright, so now we can import the images down to our login page and use. So import I open from. So we move out of pages, then we access assets. Then from assets, we can get the I open.png. So we import for the I close as well. Alright. So now within the input container we've created here, we can put the two images. So we can use image. So we use the image tag because they are images. Then we specify the source to be I open or I close. So we are going to have both and hide based on which one is available at that particular point. Alright, so those are the two. And if we go back to our browser and check, then we have this. So it's looking like it already. So the next thing we want to have now is the forgot password. So that's a link. So I'm going to create some generic classes that I can just reuse. So I will have a flex class, then justify end. So we currently don't have this, we'll create those later. So this is going to be a flex container that justifies its contents to the end. And within that, we can now have a different content, so that is going to be link. By the way, we can access the link we can get access to a component called link within our React Router DOM, and with that we can use it to navigate to wherever you want to go. So import, so like this, so you import link from React Router DOM, and now we can use the link as a component. So it links to a route. We currently don't have the route for forgot password yet, so we just use the slash, then we can have forgot password within it. Right, so that's it about this. So if we go back to the page and check once more, so it's still looking okay. So the next thing we want to have here is the button. So the login button. So let's create that as well. So the type would be type of submit, because we are within a form and we want to submit. Then we click on enter. So we use submit. And there we have it. Right. So the next thing, we want to create the container for these two social auth contents. So let's have those. So they will not be within the form because they are not controlled by the form. The only thing that are controlled by the form is the input fields and the button. So let's bring this out. So we're going to put this within a grid because as you can see, they are within a grid and perfectly spaced out. So we're going to have it within a grid. So like I'm going to have a generic class for the flex. I'm also going to have a generic class for the grid. So that way we can easily make use of it whenever whenever the necessity comes up. So we're going to have grid and it's going to be grid 2. Yeah, it's going to have grid gap 2 as well. So currently we've not created all this class. We are going to do that later on. So within our grid, we have two social items. So let's just create a class for that. So I'm calling it social button. So the first one will be for Twitter and the other will be for Google. So again, let's download the PNG files here and just reuse it there. So those are the benefits you get from using Figma. So all the content you have, you can just get it and you use it within the real implementation. So I'll get the icons. Alright, so I've downloaded them and I've drawn them here. So we have the Google PNG and Twitter PNG. Okay. So the next thing is to bring them in again. Right, so those are in. So here we can now have the image for the Google icon or Twitter first. Then in front of the image, we can now have the Twitter text itself. So let's put that within a span so that we can also control it if need be. Then also we have this for Google. Alright, so if we go back to the browser and check this out, so this is what we have. So these are layouts. So the way I like working with my HTML designs is I like laying out things first, then going down to the CSS section to style things out. So that way you can easily comprehend what we are doing. Right, so finally I think the last thing we have now is the link to either sign up or sign in. So let's have that as well. So I'm calling this switch option, and here we can have the contests. So the first one is don't have an account yet. So let me just copy everything and post here. So now we can target the sign up itself and add a B tag to it. So we can target the B tag later on within our style to style it differently. And I think that's literally all for the content within our login page. So we can now start styling it now. Alright, so remember the style.scss is linked through the HTML, and as a result, it's going to affect every content the index has access to. And since we are literally passing every content within the index, it's going to affect every of our contents. So what we can do here is we can come down here. So let's locate the generics and define them. So back to the login page. So one of the generics is the flex. So let's locate flex. So dot flex. And yeah, the display is just going to be flex. So as soon as we need any other component, we'll just come to define it. And we want to define the other components within the flex. So what I mean here is that you get to use this justify end when you have flex defined. Okay, so that's the pattern I want to work with this. So within the flex box, within the open and close brace, you can now define another class. So this and others is all the benefits you get with using SCSS. Okay, so and dots. So let me just copy this so that we don't have issues with typo. Alright. So now we want to justify content, and so this is going to push everything to the right side. Right, so if we go back, probably nothing much will show, but we'll get to see that eventually. Right, so that's the first generic. So the second one is going to be the grid. So let's define that as well. So the display is going to be grid. And yeah, also like we did for the flex, we are going to specify the other grid content within the grid itself. So that means you have to specify the grid class before using any other grid component or grid class. Alright. So here we can now specify the grid template column. So this will just be 1FR. Okay. Then the next would be the grid gap. And I'll just specify the grid column gap. And since it's 2, it will just be 2EM. Okay. So those are the generics I think we have for now. So now we can go back to the login container class itself and handle the parts that are kind of tailored to the login. So let's give it a padding. So let's give it a width of 100% and a padding horizontal actually. So the vertical will be 0, the horizontal will be 20 pixels. So the idea is when we shrink down to a mobile version, when everything starts coming down, there will still be padding for it to stay. Okay. And then we can specify the background color, which will be the primary color. So if we go back now, we should have a difference. We don't have for some reason. Okay, we didn't specify the height. So the height, minimum height actually, would be 100 VH. So again, let's check it out. Nothing still. Right, so what are we missing? So let's just inspect the page and see what we've missed. Alright, so the background color is wrong, is cancelled. Invalid property background color. So it's complaining about value, and I've seen the issue here. So we don't need to put this within a quotation. So let's just remove the quotes. Alright, so let's refresh again. And here we have it. So it's looking like what we want. So if you notice now, you realize that it's scrolling at the side here. So that's because we added padding to the whole thing, even though we specified a width of 100% as well as a minimum height of 100 VH. So what is done is that it's add the 20 padding to this the already size. So to resolve this, we can just have box sizing, and we'll give it border box. So that means it's going to remove the padding from the size itself. So with this, we should have removed all the scrolling. Alright, so this looks okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to undo the inner parts. Okay, so the inner part is going to have a maximum width of 500 pixels. So that way, everything's become kind of shunt together. So let's quickly compare the scaling and see if it's going to match. I think it's going to match. Alright, so now we want to center this. So we can just have the margin. So the top margin from the top would be, I think, 50, and from the bottom 50 as well. Then from the left and right is going to be auto because I want it centered. Alright, so the top is kind of causing an issue here. So instead of specifying margin from the top and bottom, I would rather use padding. So let's use padding. So padding from top and bottom will be 50 pixels. And actually, let's put the padding content within the login container itself. So top and bottom will have 50 pixel. Okay. Alright, so this is what we have now. Okay, compared to what we have, not still close. So now let's undo the logo. So the logo will be generic too because we might want to use it at other points. So logo. And the logo will have a font size of, let's say, 36 pixel. A color of secondary color. Then the font family will be the secondary font. So let's see what it looks like. Alright. So already getting close to what we designed here. Right, so let's center this. Let's make sure everything is centered. So we can just do that by test align. Hopefully it works. Okay, that's literally it. And also I want to give it some margin from top and bottom. So margin top will be 50 and bottom 50 as well. So let's see how that forms. Right, I think that's okay. So the next is the title. So the title is kind of specific to the login itself. So let's put that within the login container. So for the title, I will specify a font size of, let's say, 26 pixel. Then the font family is already what we want. Then I'll give it a test align of center as well. Let me see how this looks like. Alright, so we need to change the color now. So the color here is white with an opacity or an alpha of 65%. So another benefit of SCSS, so you can specify color easily with RGBA. So we can say color equals to RGBA into white. So you can specify the white directly, which you can do directly with CSS. Then you can now specify the alpha. So the alpha will be 0.65 because that's what 65% is. Alright, so we have content. So we have the sign in, and I think it matches the color. So let's give the sign in a margin bottom as well. So margin bottom of 50 pixel. So I think that looks okay. So the next thing we want to have is the inputs. So the inputs so I think the input is just peculiar to the login container. So we'll just have the design within here. Because from the design, so we only made use of this particular input type in the login screen. Okay, so let's just have it within the login star. Right, so we specify the input field. So just give it a width of 100%. So it's going to take the available space. So that's what we have. Then a margin bottom of 20 pixel. That should work. Then a height. Actually, a padding. So the padding will be at the vertical axis. So 5 pixel and the horizontal axis will just be 0. Right, so finally the background color and the border. So background color will be transparent. Let's see how that looks. Alright, so we are not able to remove the background color because this is kind of pre-filled. So one way we can undo this, I think there are several ways to disable pre-filling, but for some reason Chrome can be funny and it won't take into cognizance the specification. Okay, so however, let's go back to the input and let's specify autocomplete equals to new password. So I think I saw this from somewhere. And specifying this will make sure it's not auto-filled. So let's say again. So another way to make sure your content is not auto-filled is to not put it within a form. So that way it's not aware of what is going on within it. But we want a form actually. So let's just work with this. So as you can see now, with the autocomplete new password, it kind of remove the autocomplete feature here. Alright, so let's remove the border. So for the border, it's going to be none. And the outline as well. The outline will be none. Alright, so let's go back. Okay. So this is what it looks like. However, in the design, we have a border under. So we can actually improvise on the border. So 1 pixel solid. Actually, let's have the border as none. Then we can now define border bottom. 1 pixel solid. Then we can make use of this. I think the transparency goes as far as 0.19. So that's 19%. So let's see how this looks like now. Alright, so that's still actually obvious. So it's quite faint here. So let's even go down more. So let's make it 0.1. Okay, this looks better. Also, we can improve the padding. And the 500 pixel is kind of big, so let's reduce it to 400 pixel. Alright, so this looks okay. Alright, so we can type in. So let's change the color of our text to white. So we can just do that by color equals to white. Right. Alright, so the next thing we want to have is the definition for our input container. And what that will be doing will just be to make it a relative position that the image content can now be an absolute against. So this is what I'm saying. So you have the input container and the position would be relative. So within our input container, we can now target the images within it and give it a position of absolute. So with this, we can have our content here. Alright. So let's have the right at 0. Let's see what that gives us again. Okay. Then we can have the top at 50%. So this will push it down more than the usual content. 50%, not 50%. Okay, so let's check again. So this pushed it down here. So to actually push it back to the center, what we can do is we can translate it. So transform, translate, I think minus y, 50%. Translate y at minus 50%. So let's see how this looks. That doesn't look like what we want. Okay. So actually we can check for best position here. So let's try 40% and see. So we might not really necessarily need the translation. So let's try 30%. Okay, let's actually see what 0 looks like itself. Okay, 0 is bad. So 20%. Yeah, I think 20% looks okay. So let's work with that. So now we can disable one and show one later on from the code section. That's it with that. Actually, I want to change the input field from it being a margin bottom to margin top. Because from what you can see here, you can see that that's pushed the forgot password down more than we want. So take a comparison here. So we can change the input field from margin bottom to margin top. Alright, so this is what it looks like. And we have the forgot password back to its usual position. Alright, so it looks like the justify content we define here is not working. So let's inspect and see what's wrong. So justify content end is flex. Alright, so it should be flex end and not end. So let's update that. So flex end. Okay. Alright, so we have that in the position we want it. So let's design our link. So generally the link is just same thing as A, just that the link component has abstracted this to work well with React Router DOM. So we have a font size of 14 pixel. We can specify a font weight of 500 pixel, 500 not pixel. Then the color would be the secondary color. And also the text decoration. So to remove the underline, so the text decoration will be none. So let's see what this looks like. Alright. Okay, so that looks okay compared to what we have here. So I actually think the font weight is too much. It looks very obvious. Yeah, so let's remove the font weights. Okay. Then back to the login container. We really don't need to give the generic. So this is a generic A tag now. We don't need to give that one a margin or padding. But we can now come down to the login container itself to give the a margin top of 10 pixel. And let's see how it looks. Actually, I think that looks okay. Alright. So the next thing is the button. So let's have the button be a generic button. So we're going to have a width of 100% and a height of, let's say, 50 pixel, border radius of 6 pixel, and a background color of secondary color of white. Let's see how this looks like. Alright, so it looks close. However, we need to remove the border. So border none. Also, we need to remove the outline none. So the next thing we want to do now is we want to style the text. So let's just say font size. Actually, the font size is okay. I think what we need is the font weight, which is 500 pixel. 500 not pixel. Then we can have the color. I think the color is actually white. So let's see again. Alright, I think this looks good. Okay. So the next thing we want to work on is the spacing. So I think it has more space from the top than the bottom. So let's undo that within the login. So button. I think that's the only button we have, so we can just use that. Yeah, that's the only button we have. So margin top, we can use that as, let's say, 40 pixel. The margin bottom, we can use 20 pixel. So let's see how that looks. Alright, so that looks quite okay. Also, let's give it a cursor of pointer. That should be it for the general button. Alright. So now let's undo the social buttons. So I think that one is peculiar to the login container, so we can just design it within the login container. Social button. So by the way, if you observe, you notice that they are divided into two already. So that's as a result of the grid we defined. So let's design the social buttons now. So it's going to have a width. No, the width is already defined. All we need now is just the height. So the height is going to be 50 pixel, just like the button. Then the background color would be black. So let's use the RGBA. So black by default, then with an opacity. So let's check. Yeah, opacity of 90. So 0.19. And also border radius of 6 pixel. So let's see what this looks like. So this is what it looks like. Okay, so let's position all the contents within it. So let's use div and display as stretch, align center, align item center, justify content center. Right, so that's what it looks like. Actually, it looks like the font in our button is quite small. Let's increase it a little bit. Font size, system result. Okay, so that's okay. 15. I think 15 can be better. All right. Right. So let's go back to the social button. I think the icons looks okay. So let's see the image. Let's give it a margin right of 5 pixel. And let's give the color itself. So the color to white. Okay. So the font here are not as big as what we have here. So again, let's increase this to 10. And the font size, let's use 14 pixel. Alright, so this looks okay. Then let's give it a cursor. So cursor pointer. Right. So now all we have left is the item under. So let's get access to that. So switch option. Let's come down to switch option. And I think that's just peculiar to the login as well. So switch option, margin top, let's say 50 pixel. Then the font, so let's see the font. So the font we have here by default has the color white with 33% opacity. Let's put that in place. So color equals to RGBA white, then 0.33. Right, so this is what it looks like. So let's center it by test align center. Then we can undo the B part. So B, then we can give it a font width 500. Keep putting pixel here. Then the color, we now use the secondary color. Alright, so this is what it looks like. Let's compare with what we have here. Yeah, I think we are quite close. Okay. Alright, so let's move on to the register page. So literally for the register page, we are using similar content with for the form parts, we have similar contents. So what we can do is we can as well just come down here. So we extract the form parts. I think that's the part that needs extraction. So we can call this, we can create a component for this, const auth form. So it's going to have access to props later on. Then we can return the form. Okay. So later on, we are going to be make use of the add form within our register. So we can as well just export it here. So again, we have just 52 lines of code. So if it's getting larger, you probably want to just extract it in a different file and have it there. Right, so as we've extracted now, we can come down here, add form. Yeah, and the only difference between the register form and the login form is the forgot password. So we can specify that this is login as a prop, and all we want to use this for is to come down here and remove the forgot password. So we only want to show the forgot password when props.login. So that is when props.login is true. So that's when we want to use the forgot password components. Right, so let's check it out. So since this is login, it's still working. So let's come back to the register screen. So let's copy this whole thing here. So we are still using the login container. I guess we could have just renamed that to host container. That should still work. And here we can remove the login and we'll try to import the auth form here. So we imported the auth form from login, and here is what we have. So we can change this one to sign up. We don't need the grid contents here. And yeah, let's change the content for the, let me save this. So let's change the content for the sign up. Alright, so there we have it, both the sign up and sign in. So let's implement the link here. So that means we can just replace this with link. So let's come down to login and replace this with link to register. And the same thing for the register. Link to login. Alright, so take note of the backslash here. So I'll just put it. Alright, now let's check it out. Link is not defined. So let's come back to the register and define link. So we've not imported it here. So import link from route done. So as you can see, here is it. And now if we access sign up, as you can see, we got sign up, and also we can go back to login. Yeah, so there we have it for the login and register. So I would just work underneath to design the chat UI, and would start working on the integration from the next episode. So guys, see you in the next episode, and bye.